Hey everybody, it is Mike Petralia Trags back with the latest episode, the latest installment, if you will, of the Code Reds podcast here on the CLNS Media Network. My pleasure to welcome back Gordon Wittenmyer of the Cincinnati Enquirer. Does a great job covering all things Cincinnati Reds for Cincinnati.com and the Enquirer. Gordon, are you happy to be back in Arizona, a signal that baseball's right around the corner?
Oh, yeah. Have you seen the weather back up north? You're in it,
yes.
right?
Yeah, I am in it. I will be heading down to Goodyear, as a matter of fact, this coming Sunday, spending a week down there, boots on the ground, as you will. And I'm looking forward to it. But yeah, I'm sure it's better than the white stuff on the ground.
Oh, yeah. Short answer to your question. Yes, I'm happy.
Okay, we've actually got news right out of the gate here on Wednesday as we record this, the first day of Pictures and Captures working out. They reported earlier in the week, but the first workout for Pictures and Captures was on Wednesday. And Rhett Lowder, no big deal, he says, soreness or little stiffness in his right elbow, but it is something Terry Francona already spoke about it, and he said that he told I can just picture Tito telling this to Rhett, kid, you're not 37. You're still very young, and we're going to treat you like you're very young and like your whole career is ahead of you. So I assume that's the way Terry Francona and the staff is treating this Rhett Lowder bump in the road.
Yeah, they and Rhett call it a precautionary measure that they. It happened about a month ago where he started feeling a little something in the elbow. He said he just wasn't recovering right after he would throw a bullpen session. So they said, well, just shut it down for a while, and they did. And he had an MRI. It showed no structural damage, according to everybody involved. And he's back to throwing this week. But, he's behind where he would have been had he. So, he'll be behind everybody else's schedule. It probably means, as they play it safe, it probably means that he's not going to be ready when the season opens. That's just me looking at the landscape of this thing, and they don't need to push him or rush him. It doesn't mean that it's serious. He could open on the IL, and that could just be paperwork, just because. He could also open in AAA for the same reason. Right now, I don't think there's any reason for great alarm. And everybody else looks healthy at this point. And one person in particular who that might might be significant that being the case is the guy that came in last year behind everybody else, Nick Lodolo,
right?
And who spent 3-4 stints on the IL last year with different things. He's looking especially good this year. He did a lot of core work, and according to Nick Kroll, is stronger than he's ever been on the strength tests that they do. He threw on the side today. So if he's good to go, stays healthy, and the rest of them stay healthy, big if, there's 6 weeks to go here, then no reason to rush him. No reason to rush Rhett Lowder. And I think he'll be there by the end of things.
Well, and I think the reason this really concerns some Reds fans right out of the gate is because Rhett Lowder, you could make the case, has the best stuff on the rotation or in the rotation, and he showed so well. I know you wrote about this for Cincinnati.com. 6 starts, and I think it was a 1.17 ERA in those 6 starts. Tremendous debut for the kid. But I think Francona's been around long enough to know, and certainly DJ, Derek Johnson, the pitching coach, they've both been around the block long enough to know that you have to pace somebody at that age and not let him get ahead of himself.
Oh, yeah, without a doubt. And I think that Lowder seems to have a good head on his shoulder. We saw that last year, too, by the way, that, just kind of the poise he took on him, and the mature approach he took to pitching. He seems to kind of have a mature approach to this health situation, too. So I think he'll be fine. And one of the things he said that resonated a little bit was he talked about putting his trust in these guys. Remember, this is the kid who, when he got drafted, wanted to pitch in the pros that year, and they said, no, you pitched a lot already in college. We want you to we're going to shut you down. You'll ramp it up again next spring, and you'll just do strengthening and conditioning between now and then. He wasn't too happy about that, but the way it played out, he didn't throw his first professional pitch until spring training last year. And by the end of that year, he was making 6 starts in the big leagues. So I think he feels he has reason to trust these guys at this point. And that's what he's going to do.
Speaking with Gordon Wittenmyer of the Cincinnati Enquirer and, of course, Cincinnati.com, I want to spend a little bit of time on Nick Lodolo, how crucial he is for the Reds pitching staff to take, and the pitching rotation in particular, to take that next step in 2025. I think they need Nick Lodolo near his peak all season long if they're going to make a run at not only the postseason, but I think in Terry Francona's mind, make a run at winning the division in a very competitive division with Milwaukee, the Cubs, and the St. Louis Cardinals. Nick Lodolo, to me, if they have him, and then they have Hunter Green, and then they have Andrew Abbott, and they have Rhett Lowder, Brady Singer, it really gives a different feel to the entire rotation.
Yeah, to your point, Nick Lodolo, when healthy, many people in the game consider him their best pitcher. And we know what Hunter Green did last year, and we know what Hunter Green's reputation has been since the day he was drafted. And he lived up to it last year for sure. But Nick Lodolo is that special. He's left-handed, power arm, has the stuff, and he showed it when he got healthy at times last year. So I agree with your point on that, but I'll push back just a little bit on that, because while I think that a healthy Nick Lodolo alongside a healthy Hunter Green gives you a playoff caliber start to a rotation, no doubt. They've got more depth this year, more experience this year than they had last year at this time. And when you're able to drop Brady Singer into that mix, who until they picked up Wade Miley on the minor league deal, was the only guy in the organization that had made more than 26 starts in a season. And
that's remarkable.
He won. Yeah. So he's a good pitcher with a good track record, and has proven to be it so far in his career more durable than any of these other new teammates of his are. So I think that matters. They brought Nick Martinez back. We saw what Nick Martinez can do. You could call him depth if you want. He was their best pitcher in my mind last year. You know, he won the Reds Pitcher of the Year award. And so I think they've got more pieces. They've got, I didn't even mention Andrew Abbott, but they've got more pieces, and they can, if Lodolo is the one guy who's not there this year, but everybody else is, and Rhett Lowder comes back and contributes, and Wade Miley contributes, that's a lot of ifs. But they've got enough that if Lodolo isn't there, they could compete, maybe enough to win a division, even without him. But if he's there, now you're talking about a rotation that can win playoff series.
Right. And I think that's a great point, Gordon. And what are they going to do with Nick Martinez? I again, you never can have enough pitching. Last year was proof positive of that theory. But they have so many arms and so many, it seems, quality arms, veteran arms. And to get a guy back like Nick Martinez, how are Derek Johnson and Terry Francona going to fit him into the pitching staff?
He's in the starting rotation. I mean, I don't think there's any doubt about that. If he falters, or if they say, well, it's not really working, or this guy is, a month in or whatever, then yeah, he could go to the bullpen, and we know he's done a terrific job there. But he's in the rotation right now. Shoot, the guy's the most expensive player that I think. I haven't looked this up to be certain of this, but I believe he's only one of only two $20 million players in the history of the franchise.
That is,
I believe.
I would never have guessed that. $21.05 million qualifying offer is what he signed, and only one of two. That's pretty incredible.
I believe that's only one of two, right? Because obviously Joey Votto.
Joey Votto, right?
I don't know what did Junior make in the biggest year of his contract, and what did Homer Bailey
I'm going to guess
year?
around 12 to 13. I'd have to go back and look, Gordon. I don't have it off the top of my head. Yeah. I actually, if you give a really good answer to my next question, you know what I'll do? I'll research it because I do have a computer in front of me. So let's move on to something Terry Francona said, Gordon, about whether or not they might consider a 6-man pitching rotation. I asked Eric Johnson this on the Code Reds podcast last month in January, and he said, it's certainly something we would consider, but not something we're leaning towards. And Terry Francona seemed to kind of confirm that, you know, there are places for it, but he would rather not go in that direction. Why do you think that is? Why do you think Terry Francona would rather stick with a 5-man rotation?
Well, what we didn't know the exact second that he said that was that he knew he didn't have Rhett Lowder necessarily. So he only had 5 guys.
Right.
But he made a really good point about the 13-man pitching staffs and what that means. If you consider 6 of your guys rotation guys, then that takes a guy out of the bullpen. And then how do you do all the math on that with the innings if somebody, the way he put it, has a hiccup? I think the game is trending that way anyway. I mean, somebody pointed this out to me. I didn't even realize this, but after we talked to Terry yesterday and he gave that response to the 6-man rotation possibility,
right,
it was maybe an hour later that the scroll on MLB Network was the Mets announced they're going to a 6-man rotation. And we already know the Dodgers are doing it. Dodgers have the 2-way designation on Shohei, so they have the luxury of that with the roster. But in a day and age of 5-inning starters and 160-inning workhorses, I think that's a reasonable thing to look at, because it's about workload management, right? And then that becomes about rest as well as what you're throwing in an actual game. So it's a complicated calculus, because there are some guys that are going to thrive on an every 5th-day schedule and that are built better for it, and some guys that aren't. The Dodgers have 3 Japanese pitchers in their rotation. They're used to pitching every 6 days or once a week.
Right.
And so it works for a rotation like that. So if you've got, if Hunter Green is going to thrive every 5 days, but Lodolo could use an extra day's rest, and Nick Martinez is going to be, a rubber arm who can pitch whenever, and then Rhett Lowder's a guy you're going to want to watch his innings. So now all of a sudden, how do you fit all those needs into the math? But I think it can be done, and I think when you talk about, you got teams that win games going to the bullpen with 1 or 2 outs in the 5th regularly, just because of the way their team's built. And that's where we are nowadays. 20 years ago, you'd have said, well, that's a non-starter. That's a non-competitive team if you're doing that. Now that's the way things look more and more often. I think a 6-man rotation is a reasonable thing to kind of keep in the back of your mind if this pitching depth continues to look like it does.
A little bit more on Terry Francona in a little bit, but I want to get to the bullpen. And my eyebrows were raised a little bit with the signing of Scott Barlow, I believe 1 year, $2.5 million contract, had a lot of experience in Kansas City, was traded to San Diego in 23 last year, spent it in Cleveland, and no, Terry Francona did not have him because Terry Francona left baseball after the 23 season.
Although
but still,
Terry Francona was a special assistant for the Indians or the Guardians that year.
So he's familiar with him. So that helps
in
that regard. Definitely. Thank you for clarifying that, Gordon. But what do you think Scott Barlow brings to the Reds bullpen, this late to the game, but still, right before or right as Pictures and Captures report?
He brings another lit flare under Alexis Diaz's ass because same way Taylor Rogers probably did, right?
Yep.
Another former closer on the left side that they just picked up 2 weeks ago. Look, Alexis Diaz was dominant when he debuted in 2022 in the first half of 23 and wound up making an all-star team. He was a big part of that bullpen that overachieved that year, which became the backbone of them being competitive. I know we talk about all the hitters that broke in and the dynamics of McLean and Ellie and the like, but they don't go anywhere without the heroics of that bullpen in 2023, and they wound up having a winning season of the whole thing. Diaz was part of that, but after the All-Star game that year, he faded down the stretch. He probably got gassed. And then last year, honestly, he wasn't ready. He wasn't prepared, and maybe he felt like it was going to come a little too easy. I don't know. And his numbers weren't good. His performance wasn't. The numbers or the eye test weren't good. And so if you plan to be in the playoffs this year and everything they've done this offseason indicates a sense of urgency with this team, he needs to be what he was the first half of 2023, or he needs to be somewhere else that's not the ninth inning. And so if you believe that he's got the ability to do it, then here's a little motivation for you.
Could it be, Gordon, that maybe the Reds have 2 or 3 guys in that role this year? Is it as simple as that, leaving the door open for that possibility?
I think that's absolutely a possibility. And I think the fact that they probably had fewer options last year was probably part of the problem when it came maybe to Diaz or Fernando Cruz at times. He looked like the best pitcher on the planet for 2-3 weeks and then struggled like crazy. So I do think that having multiple guys that have really good, strong track records in these leverage spots, including closing, is going to give, especially a guy like Terry Francona, who has had many different kinds of teams and pitching staffs and won with different kinds of pitching staffs, the kind of options that can make this a really competitive group.
By the way, I cannot mention Scott Barlow without bringing up the hair. Have to do this. So I am prepared when I get there this coming Sunday at Goodyear at the Reds Player Development Complex in Goodyear. I've got to make sure that when I see Scott Barlow and I don't confuse him for Rhett Lowder and vice versa. Have you seen them both in the same clubhouse together yet?
I haven't seen Barlow yet because he was getting his physical, I think, today. So we wouldn't expect to see him until Thursday. But I've seen pictures. I don't know if I think the face is just different enough. I don't think I'll confuse him, but you never know.
You're better than I am, Gordon.
and besides, Rhett oftentimes in the clubhouse will wear his long hair in a bun. So he's a little easier to spot that.
That is true. So maybe he'll do that just for his own sake to make sure people aren't confusing him for the 6th, 7th, and 8th inning right-handed guy out of the bullpen. So we will. Yeah,
help you be able to identify.
Anything that makes my job easier, I'm all for, and I am going to support any player that does that. All right. What about the news on Spencer Steer? Again, another little bit of an eyebrow raiser when you reported this week, Gordon, that his shoulder wasn't quite fully 100% recovered from what he dealt with late last season. Where does Spencer Steer stand?
Yeah, I wouldn't. It's not red alert at this point. Obviously we're just starting camp, but the fact that he was bothered by soreness in that shoulder and playing through it late last season, and still needs to be kind of brought along gingerly at this point. Does make you a little aware, and I don't think it's going to put him on the IL or anything like that.
No.
It did last year, but we're told that he's going to DH in some of the early spring games to take the pressure off the throwing with that shoulder, but that he'll eventually work into playing some positions. And we know that this guy plays so many different positions. You're talking about, throwing from left field, throwing from, whatever he'd be throwing from first base if he's playing there, maybe even get a turn at third. I don't know, maybe right field. So you're talking different types of throws. You're talking, putting the shoulder through different stresses. I suspect he'll be okay. Spencer Steer is pretty durable. He seems to, at least in the couple of years I've been around this team, he's the one guy you just sort of put in there and he's going to play every day.
You never know where he's going to play sometimes, but
right.
I guess he kind of fell into a bit of a groove in left field. And if you had to, put me on the spot and to ask me where is he going to play most of the time, I would have said left field with certainly some first base and DH sprinkled in, but we'll see how that plays out. The only reason I bring up Spencer, go ahead.
Okay, so let me throw this at you. So his shoulders, let's just give him perfect health in that shoulder, and he's ready to open the season. He can play anywhere, make him throw. You say left field. Okay, I give you that. Left field. Where's Gavin Lux playing?
Well, either third base or second base is my answer to that, depending on Matt McClain.
Playing second base. Where's Matt McClain playing?
Matt McClain, here's for now, for the time being, here's what I would have. I would have Matt McClain at second. I would have Ellie De La Cruz at short. I would have TJ Friedel in center field. I would have Spencer Steer in left. I'd have Christian Encarnacion Strand. And maybe I'm really jumping the gun here, assuming that CES is going to get back to where he was in 23. But I'd have CES and possibly Jamer at first base. And I haven't mentioned third base, have I? So I'd probably have Gavin Lux at third. Because I think Matt McClain's probably more. I think you have a better defensive up the middle situation with McClain and De La Cruz, and let everything else kind of sort itself out. And I feel that same way about TJ Friedel. Yeah. Who's your best center fielder? I think TJ Friedel is your best center fielder. And then I know Terry Francona well enough to know, give me the spots that are the most important, and all of the other stuff I'll figure out as it goes along. But that's just my read on it at the very beginning of spring training.
I like your up the middle. I think that's, Stevenson behind the plate, Ellie and McClain in the middle infield, and Friedel in center. That's a nice start. It's a lot better than they looked last year going into the season, and it's a great start for a team that desperately needs to catch the ball better. From that point on, Gavin Lux is a nice left-handed bat that, if he does what he's capable of doing, has to be in that lineup. Spencer Steer has to be in that lineup. Jamer Candelaria, you're paying him to be in that lineup. If he's healthy and can do what he's done over the course of his career on balance, he's got to be in that lineup. And you start to run out of spots pretty quick.
Here's the thing, Gordon, about
Austin Hayes. Hayes has to play.
Yes.
So
the thing that this affords Terry Francona is he can now make more changes in the middle of the games to match up. Terry Francona, one of the things that impressed me in Boston, and certainly in his time in Cleveland, he can match up as well as any manager in baseball. And he's going to have many more options. See, we look at it from the terms of who's going to start the game. Well, he wants to know which bats are going to be available for me from which side of the plate, not only at the start of the game, but the end of the game. And that's kind of where I would say a lot of people kind of miss the boat when they say who's going to play where. That's the only caveat I would throw in there, if you will.
Well, this goes back to what we talked about with the pitching staff and, making pitching changes in the 5th inning. It's not about what my starter's doing for me for 7 or 8 innings. It's about how am I putting together 9 innings? Who's gonna get my 9 innings for me? And so I think the same thing applies. I was covering the Cubs in that when they went to that World Series against Francona's Indians at the time, and I was it was amazing what he did with that team. They had that outfield wasn't the Yankees outfield of 2024 for damn sure. Bats wise, it wasn't a necessarily a Gold Glove outfield either. He mixed and matched out there. His starting rotation was in shambles. He had that knucklehead. Trevor Bauer had the drone incident injury. And they took a 3-1 lead in that series. They almost won it. He had to lean so hard on Kluber that Kluber finally couldn't win the last start that he made, or else they win that series. And the managing job that he did with what at the time going into that series was an overmatched roster was amazing. And that's the comparison that I would make to not that there's a Corey Kluber per se on this roster. I'm not saying that, but I mean, there's so many mix and match pieces here, and he's so good at
I think he's in a very comfortable spot, and I think he loves the potential of this roster. And obviously, potential hasn't won a freaking game yet. We understand that. But when he looks at this roster and the potential depth of it and the versatility, that's the other thing. I think this is a very versatile roster, and he's going to be able to do things with this roster that, frankly, on some other clubs that he's managed, even in Boston and in Cleveland, he wasn't capable of doing. And that's why I think he comes into this season kind of rejuvenated, excited. They've made a lot of moves, Nick Kroll and Brad Meador have done in the offseason to kind of put himself in a good spot. By the way, back to the Ken Griffey subject, Gordon. A little pat on my back. 2001, Ken Griffey Jr. made $12.5 million. Then 2 years later, $12.5 million, $12.5 million in 04, $12.5 million in 05. Then it dropped to 10. And then after the 08 season, he was, of course, dealt to Seattle. But that was, up until that point, the highest salary that the Reds had. And then, of course, Joey Votto was signed.
What about didn't Homer Bailey get a $100 million deal?
He did, and you're going to have to give another answer for me to look that up. But I'm going to – by the way, how's the – we talked about the weather. Any other surprises me or any fan traveling out to Goodyear should be in store for in terms of making their way around the complex? Matt McClain. We didn't bring up Matt McClain and him arriving a little bit early. What did you make of that?
A lot of guys are here early. I think that he's eager. I think that, look, I'll just say this. I think he's the key to the whole damn thing.
I tend to agree with that, by the way.
and here's why. And it's not fair to him. The guy's got three months in the big leagues. It's not fair to him at all. He missed all last season with the shoulder injury. But you didn't know what you were going to get out of him last year with the bat because he was still so young. You didn't know how the league was going to adjust to him and vice versa. So it's not like you banked on a 300 hitter or so many home runs or anything like that. But what you did bank on was a team that has so much trouble at so many positions catching the ball. You had a guy who I would rate having not seen Austin Hayes up close or some of these other new guys, guys that have a chance to make this club this year, in my mind, Matt McLean at second base is the closest thing they have to a guy that could compete for a Gold Glove. Now, would I say that if he was playing shortstop? Maybe not quite shortstop, but I think as a second baseman, he's good enough he could compete for a Gold Glove. I don't think you can say that at any other position with guys that have a chance to make this ball club. That to me is huge. They lost. They had the worst record in one-run games last year and a terrible defensive team.
Yes.
If that team does anything at all to help what was a pretty productive pitching staff last year, their run prevention becomes that much better. They win some more of those games, even with average offensive production. So that's the big deal. They're not going to get, they might get more offensive production this year, just by guys getting healthy or just by the way Francona mixes matches lefties and righties and whatever Hayes does coming off of his issues last year, whatever Lux does when he plays. So they might get a little more, but they don't have Aaron Judge in that lineup. They don't have a guy they don't have Luis Robert, who they made an effort to try to trade for. So they might score a league average number of runs. So now you have to catch the ball behind that pitching staff. And Matt McLean, to me, could be the biggest difference maker on this team. He could be the whole key to the difference between being just good enough to get in the playoffs and just not good enough and you miss it.
I think TJ Friedel is a really powerful, strong arm away from being a Gold Glove contender. But I just, with his, and correct me if I'm wrong, Gordo, but I think he has an average arm. He can get to a lot of fly balls. His range in center field is
good center fielder.
Yeah, no question.
That's a tough position to win a Gold Glove at.
Yes, and that's why I'm saying I think you almost have to have a great arm. We didn't even get into Ellie De La Cruz as a center fielder or a right fielder for that matter. Look, you put De La Cruz in the outfield, he immediately, obviously, has the best arm in the outfield. And I don't know if they are going to consider that. I don't understand the fascination with Matt McLean in the outfield at all. I do not understand that. Doesn't compute with me in the least. Ellie, that's a different story because don't you have a glut of infielders that if you moved Ellie to right field, let's say, and then worried about how you're going to fit in, help me. The new outfielder that was just signed, Austin Hayes. Right. Yeah. Then you worry about, okay, what are we going to do with Austin Hayes? What are we going to do with Spencer Steer? But if you have TJ Friedel in center and you have Ellie in right, and then you have Matt McLean at second, and let's say eventually Edwin Arroyo at short. But for the time being, you have, let's say, Matt McLean at short and Gavin Lux at second. I don't know. I think there's a case to be made there, but we'll see.
Yeah, I in a big picture, a long-term view on this thing, I agree with you. We've talked about this before.
Yes,
I've written about this. That I think the key in Ellie De La Cruz's career to getting the maximum ceiling on his offensive ability is to play another position. And I know that that's sacrilegious to some people, but it takes a lot out of you. Talk to big league shortstops. It takes a lot out of you at that position. And for a guy that runs and has power, that's a dynamic, and it's a dynamic combination of skills that also takes a lot out of you. So if you're able to play an outfield position where, quite honestly, you get a few more plays off, and it's not as hard on the body typically.
No question. That's a great point, Gordon. That's a fabulous point.
Now that to me makes sense, and what you said makes sense. However, in the moment right now, I'm not messing with Ellie De La Cruz's head. He wants no part of that.
And if he does, and Tito can't get through to him, and if Tito has a feel of, I I want to gain Ellie's trust early in my managerial time with the Reds. I don't want to be messing with that. And if Tito were to say that to me, I'd be like, I get that. I understand that. So let that sleeping dog lie. Don't mess with it. I understand it.
And plus, what we just talked about, they've got so many issues and flaws defensively around that team. You're kind of risking creating some more by putting a guy who's unfamiliar over here and then putting a guy over here. And, so, yeah.
I think that.
Plus, can you imagine?
It's a fascinating spring for that, but go ahead. Can you imagine what?
You see all the ground that Ellie covers when he's chasing down a foul ball down the left field line. Imagine if he's in right field chasing a ball to the gap and Friedel's on it. That outfield's not very big in Cincinnati. And
I mean, you do that, you can immediately you could immediately shade TJ or whoever the center fielder is to left center field, or certainly in that direction, and you immediately have more.
Just play Ellie on the line,
coverage area, or whatever. I mean, get very creative, but we've touched on a lot of subjects, Gordon. I really appreciate your time because I know this is super busy time for you out in Goodyear. You certainly have the Reds covered for Cincinnati.com and Cincinnati Enquirer.com or Cincinnati Enquirer. Anything else you'll be working on that our audience should be on the lookout for, and head to Cincinnati.com to read?
Just kind of some more Tito stuff. I do have, like, one of the things I'll just say, I guess this is a teaser. We were told last year that the reason for the manager change was that there were some accountability issues with guys in the clubhouse, and maybe, and Jonathan India even admitted late in the season that maybe some guys took advantage of their relationship with David Bell, who's one of the best human beings in the game and one of the best baseball men in the game. So maybe there were some accountability gaps that went on. And so when people say, well, what's Terry Francona going to do to change that, right? Because he's such a nice guy. He's a nice guy. David was a nice guy. He communicates. David communicates. Well, I've got some examples. I've got some examples of things that he's done in the past that are just a little bit different tone than what we've maybe seen around here.
That I want to read. That has my interest peaked, as they say, Gordon. Because Terry Francona can show a really nice smile, but behind closed doors, I am here to tell you, and you know this very well as well, he is all business. He is all about winning. And that cliche that Mark Sheldon told me last week on the sports talk show that I hosted on WLW, don't confuse friendliness with all business, the desperation to win. And I think that's true with Tito.
Yeah,
I think he is all about winning. Well, I'm going to let you go, Gordon. Thank you for the time. He is Gordon Wittenmyer of the Cincinnati Enquirer. Read his great stuff all spring, all season long on Cincinnati.com. My name is Mike Petralia, Trags. Be sure to follow me on the Code Reds podcast on YouTube. That's at Cincinnati Sports Studio or youtube.com/at Cincinnati Sports Studio. Obviously, follow our stuff on CLNS Cincy with a Y.com. Until next time, I'm Mike Petralia, Trags, and this has been the Code Reds podcast.